morning. Welcome to the International Climate Webinar Series. Our next guest requires almost no introduction, but she'd certainly deserve one. Dr. Carol Nachl is the CEO of Crystal Energy, one of the world's leading voice in the energy economics, governance, and geopolitics. She has advised the IMF, the World Bank, and governments for 45 countries, and she's been championing women's leadership in energy for near 2 decades. Today, she joins us for this series of ICWS Industry Blitz, 10 minutes straight to the point, to help us cut through the noise on what Africa needs for green transition post COP30. Dr. Nachl, welcome, and let's dive in. Dr. Nachl, one sentence, if you can give us what is Africa's most urgent energy challenge post COP30?
Energy access.
Energy access.
I mean, I can spend a long time explaining, but really when I think of Africa as a continent, of course, we cannot generalize because some countries are in better position than others. But in general, I think compared to the rest of the world, we still have the fundamental problem of giving access to all the population to first of all, access to energy and electricity in particular, but not only just access, reliability as well. So access to reliable energy supplies.
Thank you. Talking about Africa and COP30, what is the single biggest obstacle climate finance from actually reaching African projects on the ground in reality?
I mean, look, when it comes to obstacles, it's never one factor. It's a cocktail of different factors. But if I were to put it bluntly, I would say, because finance will go to where the most important opportunities are and where you have the best balance of risk and reward. And in that respect, when I look at that balance, and I think not just in terms of obstacles on global markets or constraints of financing, but I look at what is the obstacle that governments can control and can tackle to facilitate, to remove at least one obstacle. And that's where I think that in many cases in Africa, the main obstacle that governments can address immediately and more easily than other factors is the policy environment, the investment climate, terms offered. I'm not talking about low tax rates or incentives, but simple, clear system, resilient system, stable, predictable. These are things that governments in Africa can deliver to investors, and that by itself will enhance the attractiveness of the region for climate finance.
Thank you, Dr. Talking about, you cited balance. Do you think that fossil fuel revenues versus green transition urgency for Africa, is that a contradiction or rather an opportunity?
Look, I like to be pragmatic and not idealistic. I mean, it's good to have an ideal word, but we have to also look at the reality. It's easy for me to sit here in London where I have 24 hours supplies of electricity. I don't have to worry about whether I find fuel to fill my car. I don't have to ever want to fly. I just go and book my flight straight away online. So I cannot sit in this place and then preach African countries about the need to ditch their most precious resources in the name of saving the climate. I'm not saying that saving the climate is not important, but this is where I'd like to look at oil and gas revenues as an opportunity and not as a contradiction to pursuing green agenda. Because let's face it, Africa is very rich in oil and gas resources. Not everywhere those resources have been exploited properly or in accordance to good governance. But they can be a good opportunity for governments to use those revenues and invest them to accelerate the energy transition towards a cleaner, greener future. But so far, the main problem is not whether they are generating revenues from oil and gas, but it's mainly how those revenues are being invested to pursue the good cause of safeguarding the climate. And this is where I think a lot more can be done to improve the management of the oil and gas revenues, the governance of the management of those oil and gas revenues in order to pursue broader and more noble targets. But I wouldn't be in a position to say, oh, you know what, keep your resources in the ground and look for something else. Why? You can still invest, you can still produce in an environmentally friendly way by reducing methane emissions and gas flaring, by reducing the carbon intensity of operations, and then use the revenues wisely to achieve other targets in the economy.
I want to jump to my other question. Africa critical minerals is big, and how does Africa capture maximum economic value from that with using reform governance or unlock investment? From your perspective, what is best solution?
Actually, the energy transition can bring a massive opportunity to Africa, not in terms of reducing their carbon footprint or saving the climate, but because Africa is so rich in these minerals and metals that are needed to fuel the energy transition. And you find them across the continent. Of course, in some countries, you find them more concentrated than others for certain metals and minerals. And that is by itself a golden opportunity. But I've been studying this sector for decades now, and a lot of my work goes into analyzing the resource curse. Resource curse is not related, let's say, to oil and gas. It's actually to any resource that is finite. And this is where critical minerals or other metals needed for the energy transition also can fall under that category. So it's not whether they are present or not, but I mean, the whole problem boils down to one aspect, the management of the sector. So if we are just going to pursue the old-fashioned way that has proven to be detrimental in many countries to manage those critical minerals and the sector, then I don't think there is much value that can be created. But if we learn the lessons from the past, and the mistakes of poor management and poor governance of the sector, then I think there's, again, a fantastic opportunity for African nations to seize today and then take advantage not only of having a greener future, but also of improving their economies and the economic performance and the standard of living for all their population.
Thank you. Talking about population, among this population, there are entrepreneurs. What is the most effective model that can bring this global capital to these local African entrepreneurs?
I don't think there is an ideal model. I don't think there is a perfect model, because what one model may be perfect in one circumstance or in one country, but then when you try to copy it and paste in another country, it just falls apart. It causes more trouble than actually benefit. It's simply because you cannot say, oh, this practice is ideal. No, this practice is ideal because it works under a certain setting. So because you have already some institutions, you have a diversified economy, you have a good network, let's say, among the finance community, you have a low risk of investment, etc., etc. So there is no formula that you need to copy and paste. Actually, I am against that. I don't think that works in reality. And throughout my career, I have seen actually more disasters coming out from this kind of copy and paste blindly. But we can learn from other countries. We can learn in terms of what worked in this country and understand why it worked. What about our country? Can we implement the same? If not, what is missing? Can we adapt to our local conditions? And this is where it's like a big canvas. And you can start from the quality of institutions, to the judicial system, to the clarity of policies, consistencies, all the things that you need to have in place. Because again, even local entrepreneurs, they need the right institutional framework to flourish. Now, of course, they might end up succeeding here and there, and you would have the occasional success story, but we don't want the exceptions. We want it to be more of the general rule that applies to everyone. But mind you, of course, there will be successes and failures, but I don't want to take one success case and say, oh, this is working in the country. It has to be more widely applied within the system.
Thank you. It's clear that is a composition, and let me repeat what everyone said, and it's knows. Think globally and act locally. Is the green economy opening more doors and opportunities for women in Africa, or we are going to repeat what exclusion patterns from the old system?
I don't see why any sector, especially in energy, needs to be less diverse in terms of gender representation. Really, I never understood this logic when I teach, in addition to my full-time job at Crystal Energy, but when I teach at universities, I don't see any difference in the capabilities and the ambition and the curiosity or the skill between, let's say, men and women. I think the talent is there across the board. The good thing today is that the energy transition is happening at a time when there is a better knowledge and understanding and awareness of the importance of having a balanced gender representation in the sector. It's also, the energy transition is happening at a time where technology has evolved quite rapidly. I mean, we hear about digital technologies, about AI, and all these are also important factors in supporting the involvement of women in the industry. So you don't have to really think too hard about how to achieve a work-life balance, because that is being also facilitated. If I take all these factors into consideration, I don't see a reason why we should not have a more diverse landscape when it comes to having more women playing a role in the greener sector. And also the reality of this sector, you can have small standalone businesses, and that by itself, this kind of flexible model that you tend to see in the greener energy sector than in conventional oil and gas sector, then that by itself also supports greater participation of women. So I am more hopeful today about having a more balanced gender representation, but I still don't understand why we never had it to start with in the conventional sector.
Thank you. And before I unfortunately let you go, you you are Secretary General of the Arab Energy Club, board member at the Natural Resources Governance Institute, Arctic Icebreaker Explorer as well, and CEO of the year. Dr. Nahl, what actually left on your to-do list this year?
Every day brings something new to me. I mean, look at what's happening in the Middle East. I thought I would start the year. One of my New Year resolution in December was to have a calmer, quieter year because I'd like to focus on a new book. Things happen, and now we're facing completely new landscape on the energy sector, and that makes me work perhaps and focus differently or in a more elaborate way. So for me, every day is a journey. I don't think I'll reach a point where I say I've had enough, I've learned enough. I don't think that will happen. So I don't really have a target. As long as I'm pursuing what I'm enjoying, what I'm really passionate about, I don't see an end in sight. So hopefully you will keep on hearing from me and seeing me for many years to come. Fingers crossed.
Love to. And thank you, Dr. Nahl. Sharp, direct, and this is what we need for our discussion on the March 26th with our other guest coming to talk about Africa region and the green transition and digital transformation. If this the interview to the audience has sparked some question, don't hesitate to join us on March 26th. And also don't hesitate to share this interview with some people of your network that needs to hear it. Thank you, Dr. Nah, and see you soon.
Thank you.
Good morning. Following that insightful interview with Dr. Carol Nahl, welcome back to the fourth live discussion in our International Climate Webinar series. Today's at ICWS African chapter, we move from theory to action. We are exploring the tech bridge, specifically how to tailor carbon markets for an efficient energy transition and leverage international cooperation and partnership to scale green finance across Africa. Join me today in welcoming our guest, Madeleine Garlick, Africa Director at One Carbon World and former diplomat, specializing in nature-based assets and equitable carbon markets. Madeleine, happy to welcome you today with us. Maida Hernandez, G's advisor leading the digital and green innovation action to support African startups at the intersection of tech and sustainability. Happy to have you with us, Madeleine, Maida. And finally, Thomas Olignac, our senior energy consultant at the Netherlands Enterprise Agency, with expertise in international hydrogen, water initiative, and also energy policy. Thank you and welcome back, Thomas, to our discussion. To navigate these topics today, I'm honored to welcome and introduce our moderator, Tabitha Mutoni, as senior anchor and producer at CNBC Africa. Tabitha is a perfect voice today to manage this valuable discussion. Tabitha, thank you, and the floor is yours.
Indeed, Salma. Thank you very much for that wonderful introduction and also very wonderful introduction to all of our guests this afternoon, this morning, this evening, from wherever each and everyone is joining us. So today we do indeed have an incredible discussion, and to everyone that is joining us from all over the world, indeed, good morning again, good afternoon, good evening, and welcome to the fourth ICWS African chapter discussion on green transition and a digital transformation. And I think everyone can agree that Africa is entering a defining decade where climate ambition, we do have digital capability, and also economic growth, where they all must align. And the question is no longer whether the transition will happen, but whether it will be locally driven, inclusive, and scalable. So today's discussion focuses on what is actually required to move from pilots to systems, as Salima has put it, from just theory to action. What are the solutions that we have? That is from ideas to bankable, investable, and also measurable impact across the continent. So from all the guests that we have, I would like for us to start with Maida. Maida, let me start with you. That is from a systems perspective. So you do sit at the intersection of digital innovation and nature-based solutions, where we do see a lot of early stage, momentum is building, but scale remains limited. So from what you're seeing across African ecosystems, what is fundamentally holding back these startups?
Thank you for the question, and thank you so much for the invitation, Salima. I'm happy to be here in this call. I would say from my experience, unlike my situation here just now, because I tried to connect with my laptop and it didn't work, the innovator teams from the DJX Accelerator, which I'm responsible for, their biggest barriers are never, tech or their amazing ideas, but the startups that we work with, are really deep in their tech, their AI, blockchain, and mobile platforms for recycling waste, agriculture solutions, smart honey farming, et cetera, et cetera. Yeah, so it's not the tech. It's really mostly, I would say, number one reason, the finance, of course. Even though I was glad to see that African startups raised, more funding and showed some recovery to the last years and last year, especially in the tech field. So that's very interesting. There's still a huge gap, and I also want to second the important part of of equality here as well. I'm a feminist at heart, and I feel like it's always my duty to underline that 85% of venture capital actually goes to all male teams. That's quite crazy, and only 2% goes to all female teams. So there I always wonder, what's the situation? I mean, it's not that women work less or that they're less capable, but that there's a lot of prejudices in people's heads. And yeah, don't get me started, I would say, currently on climate funding in general, looking at the political situation globally. I mean, climate catastrophes are happening left and right, of course, but our politics are turning more and more conservative, more and more nationalist, more and more, what's happening in here, and climate has just become a kind of side topic, more or less. Um, yeah, I
Yes,
can go
yes, yes.
on and on, but those
Great,
are, I
great.
would say, the biggest.
Yeah, great. I actually want to step in there because that's a very huge number
Yeah,
that you point out there. 85% to males, in terms of VC funding, and 2%
yeah.
to women. So, what can we say is the huge discrepancy here? Why do we have more, men getting this funding compared, unlike the women? Like, what is actually happening here? Let us talk, like from your research, what have you observed? Why are the men getting more funding than women?
I mean, it's one of, the biggest, important aspects of our work in GIZ when it comes a lot about diversity as well. Yesterday, for example, I was in a workshop and I noticed, it was a lot of private sector actors, and I realized the only way of convincing them to talk a little bit about diversity and gender equality is by saying, is everybody aware of the number that, teams that are diverse outperform the other teams by 35% with only male? So yeah, so the question is why don't we look at that more? And I would say it's just the patriarchy and a lot of prejudice, a lot of things in our head are happening, and really, yeah, it's something that we need to work on globally. I would say that if you start interviewing young children, you realize there's no difference in their head between men, women, between different people. But as soon as we get older, it's just yeah, this world system that we have in our head of who is better, who is worse, et cetera, et cetera.
Exactly. So that points us to the next question, which follows up. Then we have to think about now development cooperation. Yes, we have seen the numbers. We have seen some of the barriers that we are seeing here in terms of, the funding and also the patriarchal system here, like the gender issue. that is actually happening when it comes to, some of the challenges that African startups are facing when it comes to scaling digital
Also, yeah.
solutions for nature-based assets. So how then can we have, governments, the international agencies, and even the local communities collaborate effectively? Because I believe it is an ecosystem, like people have to work together in a society.
Absolutely.
So how exactly? So how do we look at these institutions coming together to effectively accelerate now the African startups when it comes to scaling digital solutions for sustainable development? The question here, or the issue here to point out, is sustainable development.
Yes, and I would say that the answer here is just, not just obviously, but putting the people together. I mean, the Digital and Green Innovation Action that I'm working for is a EU co-financed multi-partner country agreement. So it's a whole Team Europe spirit. It's Germany, Netherlands, France, Belgium, and have I forgotten somebody? Estonia, getting together and seeing, okay, who are our partners? Who are we already dealing with? Who are we talking to? And what is happening basically in our cooperation. It's a lot about collaboration, not gatekeeping. We're very open, and honest about what is going right, what is not going right, and of course, doing this hand in hand with our partners. And we do this in our accelerator, but we also do this, on a bigger level where we sit down and we review a lot and we look at what needs to be done differently. I would say for me, it's also important, this whole narrative of Africa is an opportunity, which I often hear, which really just, ooh, I don't like it at all. It's not about opportunity, but it's a diverse continent with incredibly, brilliant people. And just like there's brilliant people everywhere in the world, and we just need to see, there's funding lacking, and we just need to see how we can collaborate to get it there.
Indeed, indeed. And Maida, you'll agree that so many accelerators exist, but yet few translate into sustainable local impact. From your
Mhm.
experience, what distinguishes an accelerator that is genuinely demand driven and also rooted in local realities from one that is not? So, that is from your interactions, what sort of feedback are you getting? Let us look at the reality check here on ground.
Yeah, thank you for this question. I completely agree with also what Carol said before. Obviously, it's not a one size fits all approach, and that's what we did here as well. Is that we sat down before we planned the accelerator, with partners. I mean, the GIZ has been doing their work for years and years, and we're very active all over the continent. So we sat down, we said, okay, how do we set this up? How do we set this up differently? What do we need here to make sure it actually works? And another asset of ours is that we actually have offices all over the world on all of our partner countries, also digital transformation centers. So there's a very big and strong network with, as I said, a lot of experience looking at the last years where people are at home. So it's an accelerator that isn't only organized by, I'm sitting here in Berlin, organized by us here in Germany or in Europe with our partners, but I have colleagues in all these countries who are brainstorming with me, and we have our local accelerators as well, where we just said, every country is so incredibly different, every team is so incredibly different. You need a local, guide as well, an advisor there that helps you on the way. And what I also received is the feedback is that obviously there's a lot of accelerators out there that there's pitch deck coachings and things like that, which is very important, but we actually had the possibility to go beyond that. So our innovators received a certain funding, and we actually heard a couple of times that this was the stepping stone for them to reach further VC funding.
Great. And I would like to ask then, like, because you point quite a number of issues there, are there any accelerators that you're working with here in Africa, and maybe which African countries, and what is the current state?
We are currently closing down this phase, and I would say we're working with Taka and the Source Plus in Kenya. And Taka it's about waste management, tracking it, gamification around it, to be able to make it more sustainable and actually to keep the people on track. The Source Plus is also a great Kenyan startup who where they do sustainable honey farming with a lot of learning, but also tracking the honey with blockchain. And then we have Agrosphere as well in Benin. And that was something that was very important to us as well for more diversity into different regions. And Agrosphere has a smart, it's about smart farming and improving, farmers' livelihoods. And they, who I would not describe it exactly, but they've been on the market for some years now already. And depending on, I would say that they've been growing. And I can't give you an exact answer, I'm realizing
Indeed.
now. But yeah, they've been on the market for a while, and I'm curious to see how it continues with them.
All right, great. So yes, the risk in innovation, that is one thing we cannot not talk about. So then
Yes.
how do we see the role of, public institutions and even development partners when it comes to effectively the risk in digital innovation? The main goal here is to unlock greater investment in African startup ecosystems.
Yes, absolutely. We actually started working with 4 different organizations in the beginning, and now we're ending with 3. I think that's also one of the points that you have to start with this kind of idea of things don't always work out, but that's part of innovation. De-risking doesn't mean that you can remove the risk completely, and that's what actually builds, I would say, like strong economies is when we try things out, and that's what innovation is all about. So here it was a long process. It was a long selection process. That was what helped us de-risk. We worked with the WFP Innovation Accelerator. That's another point where I would say always don't reinvent the wheel, but work with trained partners who have done this many times before, and look at their programs. We had multiple rounds of getting to know, and that was the important part, not getting to know just the solution and thinking about, okay, how does it scale? Where does it go? How successful can this be? But really looking at the team behind that. And we did that with a very intensive boot camp of 1 week of not only getting to know the founders and the CEOs, but the IT person, the techie in the room, the HR person, with interviews, with workshops, this boot camp. And as I had mentioned before, with our colleagues in our different partner offices of the GIZ all over, that went to visit our partners and had a talk with them, had a look at the innovation, and I would say that that's the vital part that we're really working on, is really getting to know the people, and then you get a very good feeling of what motivates them really. And then seeing where their realities are in the countries with our colleagues.
Indeed, realities and where they are at in our various countries. So this brings in the aspect of digital infrastructure and talent systems, because you cannot talk about the risk in innovation when we and at the same time not talk about the digital infrastructure landscape and also some of the talent systems that we do have or we are seeing. And I would like to speak a little bit into this, because for me what I say is that we do need critical skills for carbon markets. And African carbon markets are constrained by a shortage of practical skills rather than a theory. And the most critical gaps that I have seen are in carbon accounting and also MRV, that is measurement, reporting, and even verification. And we do see that climate data analytics at the same time and the use of digital platforms that track and trade credits also play a key role in this. So from a communications perspective, I would say there is also a failure to translate complex carbon systems into clear local narratives, which limits community participation and trust. And in a case study of East Africa, we do have so many projects. So we are seeing so many projects struggle because communities do not fully understand how carbon revenues are generated or shared. So then the question is, how do we close this talent gap? Like, what is the fastest pathway to close that talent gap at a scale? From an education systems perspective, private sector training, or blended models. And for me, I would say that The most effective approach is a blended model, which combines formal education, private sector training, and hands-on project experience. Universities alone are too slow to adapt, while private training is often too narrow. So short, intensive, certification programs are linked directly to live carbon projects are proving more effective. And just like a good example of where I am, that is in Kigali, Rwanda, we do have institutions like Carnegie Mellon University Africa, which are building high-level digital skills, but scaling impact requires integration with vocational training systems and on-the-ground apprenticeships. So we now do see digital innovation for impact. That is very critical. What can be done? How do we scale, carbon markets and creating, jobs? And Rwanda has been very, proactive in scaling carbon markets and also creating jobs for its youth. And we do also see technologies such as satellite monitoring and AI-driven MRV systems rather, and also mobile platforms. They are now allowing smallholder farmers and local entrepreneurs or enterprises to participate in carbon projects. So this creates new roles in data collection, which is very important. After you collect your data, you have to verify the data, and also project management and connecting the talent to the market. That is very important. We do have to address that disconnect that we do see there when it comes to talent and the market. And for me, the biggest disconnect that I am seeing, it lies between what is taught and what the market actually needs. Many graduates have theoretical knowledge but lack the practical skills. Just, the same way we go to school, we do a lot of theory, but we do skip or miss that practical bit of it in some circumstances or situations. So there's also a geographic mismatch with the talent concentrated in cities while carbon projects are largely rural. So that is a disconnect that we are seeing there that needs actually or really to be addressed. And additionally, we are seeing that young people are often unaware of career opportunities in carbon markets, reflecting weak communication from industry. So there's a lot that the government and public institutions have to play here when it comes to informing our youth in terms of what career opportunities are available in carbon markets. So I'd like us to go on to the next question or the next discussion, which is on climate finance and investment structuring here, because you've talked about the talent systems that we have in place. You have talked about the risk in innovation. So we have innovation, we have the talents, but finance is a big thing. We cannot operate without finance. Maida, you did mention about investment, which is very critical here. That is the venture capital funding, and quite alarming numbers that we are seeing in terms of the gender disparity there, men getting more compared to the women. So I'd like us to bring in Thomas on climate finance and investment structuring here. Thomas, the misalignment for me exists between international climate finance, which is structured around risk perception, reporting standards, and global priorities, while African carbon projects operate within local, technical, and capacity constrained realities. So from where you sit, Thomas, where can we say the misalignment is between international climate finance and the actual technical needs of African carbon projects?
Well, thank you very much for that question, and it's great to be part of the discussion. And before I go to the answer, maybe I'll just really briefly introduce myself and where I work. I work at RVO, that's the Netherlands Enterprise Agency. That's an executive agency of the Ministry of Economic Affairs, and my background is in energy, science, and in management. I'm not so schooled in international development originally, but I've been working at our international directorate since 2018, and I've picked up some tricks along the way. So I hope that will help, and also in having this discussion here. And our program, what we do is we are supporting governments in our partner countries. So it's a G2G program. It's really working on climate, on energy transitions, also on water and food security. Not only African countries, by the way, we also partner up with countries in South America, Asia, but we'll stick to Africa today. And a lot of those countries in Africa, they have at least some kind of national climate strategy or an NDC-based roadmap or a climate action plan, something along those lines, whatever you call it. But there's relatively little climate action on the continent. So we try and translate the policy ambitions into bankable projects. And you asked about the misalignment between the international climate finance that already exists and the needs of the African carbon projects. And what we see is the issue is not the lack of climate finance. There's actually a lot of capital available. You got the multilateral development banks like the World Bank, African Development Bank, the EBRD as well. Some of those are actually really quite eager to invest in energy and climate infrastructure as well. And in the Netherlands, we have development banks too. We have FMO, for instance, Invest International. So there's money, and there's also the big funds. There's the Green Climate Fund. There's the GEF, the Global Environmental Facility. There's bilateral programs like our program at RVO. There's many others in other European countries. They're supporting climate action too. And we see even private capital looking at renewable energy. Mainly that's IPPs for solar, for wind projects sometimes. Also backed by commercial banks. There's blended finance platforms like Climate Investor One. But the capital is there. My point is, I would say that the projects that they might be financing are not yet structured in a way that that these financiers can really engage with, and also the enabling environment is just not there yet. Maybe a nice example would be Nigeria. We've been working in the solar sector. We supported the development of a national solar energy curriculum together with their national board for technical education, and we saw, for instance, that 50% of the trainers had no prior renewable energy training at all, and so at that level of basic technical capacity, there's still a real gap. And so we also commissioned a study on trade barriers, for instance, in the Nigerian solar sector, and that showed that the access to finance, it was already mentioned a couple of times, it's really difficult because, well, many reasons, but we saw, for instance, input procedures, regulatory barriers, they create a lot of uncertainty for investors. And then we see the enabling environment. Like I mentioned, it's not really there. We have been working on the circular economy sector in Nigeria as well. We organized several strategy weeks in Lagos and also follow-up missions in several states. And that kind of helped us to identify concrete opportunities and in waste management and recycling, also in agreements between Dutch and Nigerian companies. But there's a lot of work that needs to be done on mapping opportunities and on aligning the stakeholders and on defining concrete action agendas.
Great. I do like that you have really captured the misalignment here and also transition into the holistic action that we should be seeing there. But then the most important question here is, how do you go about the funding structures for early stage, projects? How should funding structures evolve to better support early stage and also locally driven African carbon and renewable energy projects?
Well, one of the, I think I'll say no, it's not problems. It's mainly opportunities in the transition. Is to move away from treating all the sectors separately and try to design some kind of a more integrated system that combines energy and local industrial development and broader economic development of African countries. And I could give an example of how that plays out in practice. For instance, I find also from my personal work, hydrogen in Africa, one of the most interesting cases right now. A lot of African countries have green hydrogen strategies, examples like Morocco, Egypt, and Namibia. South Africa is very big as well. And there's quite a lot of activity there with a lot of large-scale hydrogen projects in their usually early stages of development, but with some international backing as well, but the focus has really been on like an export to Europe. So, for instance, Morocco has been positioning itself as a major exporter. Egypt is also trying to develop projects around the Suez Canal, and in Namibia, there's one of the biggest large-scale initiatives, the Hyphen project. So, these are very let's say ambitious projects. They also show how the African transition can be linked to industrial development and international trade. But at the same time, a lot of these projects are really designed for export markets, and that's a bit of a challenge, especially now that offtake in Europe and other places is not picking up as quickly as was anticipated a couple of years ago. So from a financing perspective, what you need is a clear and a reliable revenue model that also means secure offtake. And they're not really looking at local offtake, for instance. That could actually provide a much more stable demand base, for instance, using green hydrogen as a fertilizer production, or other industrial applications like maybe green steel, other sectors as well. That can anchor projects more locally, create stronger local domestic value chains, and that would probably really help it as an opportunity to connect to local economic systems. And that's one thing that we're trying to work on as well.
Indeed. So I think that funding is very important, like you very, put it there. So how then, or what mechanisms are in place that can, help incentivize the private investors when it comes to funding African carbon and nature-based projects, while at the same time managing technical, environmental, and policy risks? I'm looking at blended finance, the risk mitigation, and also scaling solutions here, Thomas.
Yes, of course. There's the ones that you mentioned, there's blended finance, risk mitigation, scaling solutions. But one important way that something that we've seen that actually works in let's say in incentivizing private investment is by, for instance, improving the underlying data and the planning frameworks that investors rely on. So I can give you a brief example. Is from our work in Kenya. So in Kenya we work very closely with the Ministry of Energy and Petroleum, and what we try and do there is to improve the national electricity demand forecasting model. And that sounds a little technical, not very financial, but it's very relevant for investment, because what investors need is a clear understanding of future demand, and also where the growth is going to happen and how the energy system is going to evolve. And with the work that we're doing there, we can also try to incorporate, let's say, relatively new trends like e-mobility, e-cooking, distributed generation of energy, and even maybe green hydrogen into the forecasting model. And there's a lot of those things going on in Kenya. And that helps the government and also the investors to plan grid expansion and then in a much more accurate way. And it already helped investment decisions by Kenya Power Company. Now they're working on grid expansion projects. It's worth tens of millions of dollars, and this is because of some of the work that we've been doing. And so it's all about de-risking, but not only financial de-risking, it's also about improving quality of data and planning.
I do like that you mentioned Kenya there. Yeah, I'm Kenyan.
Yeah.
So, and you've mentioned a very critical sector there. So when we see some gaps, I know who to come for. So there's I'd like for us to understand, great, the digital green synergy here. So Thomas, back to you. How are we seeing the digital technology, acting as the primary catalyst for green growth in your context?
Yeah, well, digital technology is especially very relevant in grid expansion projects. If you look at the kind of investments that the electricity grid in Africa needs, we're talking about billions of dollars, and this is not just for access to energy and for building power lines. It's also about smart solutions for those energy systems. Solutions like demand management, smart storage solutions, and from our point of view, one of the most important things, one of the most important applications of digital solutions is in that sector, in the transmission and distribution of power sector.
All right. Maida, what is your take in your context in terms of the digital green synergy here?
What do you mean exactly?
So this is the general question on your view in terms of how is digital technology acting as the primary catalyst for green growth?
Oh yeah, I feel like it's a bit of like a counterintuitive. Sorry, I was just busy looking at the chat, that's why, and trying to see what people are writing. I quickly need to jump to one point that Alan has here. I'll answer the question in a moment, because there seems to be a strong correlation of women-owned energy companies and female engineers. I do have to say yes, but then when it comes to those women-owned companies, there's still the prejudice here, because why? I think we have to ask ourselves here a little bit of coming back to the question before. why does our gut feeling tell us that we can trust these millions more into a company of men who are wearing suits than for example, women? But just a food for thought there. And yeah, I believe that this is kind of counterintuitive in a way, coming back to your question, because I mean, obviously data centers, AI, all this digitalization, it's just an energy consuming machine, basically. And that is not good for climate or for climate change. But I think we have to face realities here that obviously without tech, our partners couldn't work. I mean, without tech, all of our civilization at the moment as it is wouldn't work. So as Marshall also put it here in the chat, a moral compass is required to bring sustainability together here. So we have to see, you know, what is necessary and how do we use tech? How do we still, what do we do in our companies in order to become climate neutral at the end of the day? And I would say that that's just the most important part, because technology, you know, is vital to shaping our world. But we really need to think about, you know, where is it needed? Where do we limit it in order for our energy, for our planet not to exhaust faster than it already is?
Indeed, great. So for me, I would say implementation, skills, finance. That's it. That takes the day. And that is what I can say I've gathered from what Thomas has said, you know, what Maida, you know, you did point out, and also my bit on the skills, the communication bit there. But before we move on to the next speaker, Madeleine from Africa Director. She's the Africa Director for One Carbon World. Madeleine, before we go into your questions, I'd like for you to also, you know, share insights on the digital green synergy here. What's your take in your context?
Thank you, Tabitha, and lovely to join you all today. So at One Carbon World, we work predominantly in the nature-based solutions space, which for those who maybe don't know is primarily about managing the carbon in the land. So whether that's in your trees, in the grasslands, in your ecosystems, the blue economy, or through sort of farming ecosystems as well, in the sort of in the sustainable agriculture space. And so this is an area where there's a huge amount of innovation going on in how you document and measure carbon. And I would say that I have a bit more of a nuanced view on this. So there are many people out there who are convinced that AI and digital innovation is going to make measuring carbon in these contexts really straightforward, really quick, and really efficient. And that is, I think, definitely going to be some of the story. But our view is that one of the ways you ensure high integrity projects in the field, particularly in places like Africa, where communities are so intrinsically linked to the land, is that you actually need real people still doing a whole lot of the work. So real people going to the field, measuring the carbon, touching the soil, looking at the trees, talking to the communities who manage those ecosystems day to day. And so for us, we really want to see a world where you have a double track. You have data that is being generated and used from technology that will save money and save time, and that is a good thing. But we don't think you can write out the people component entirely. And so when you get people, young people, smart people using technology together, you find the sweet spot on where we're going to see huge amounts of growth and innovation in the African context.
Indeed, great. So help us understand the current shape of the African carbon market and what projections you're likely to see maybe in the next decade.
Thanks. I mean, there's a lot of different views out there on this issue, but I think you have to see the state of the African carbon market in the context of the global market. And certainly I believe that the market is at an inflection point where over the next 5 to 10 years, we are going to see a huge increase in growth in the amount of projects that are coming to life, but also in the pipeline of projects that are under development. So the global market is growing. I think that's clear to see over the last few years. I'll read a statistic for you, which is that that commitments to purchase credits from high quality nature-based solution projects in the first half of 2025 has tripled compared to 2024. So from 2024 to 25, a tripling of commitments. And these commitments are coming from multiple places. They're driven by corporations making commitments, but also the global compliance market, which is composed of agreements and commitments that governments have made to reduce emissions. And so this two-pronged approach of growth in corporate commitments and growth in business commitments is seeing, I think, a huge expansion in the demand for projects. What does that mean for Africa? Again, I have got some statistics that I want to get right. So Africa's share of the global voluntary carbon market rose from 13.5% in 2018 to more than 25% in 2023. So a quarter of the global carbon market growth in 2023 is from Africa. Now, that is really impressive because you also need to see that statistic in the context of where Africa was 10, 15 years ago, where under the previous carbon regime of the Clean Development Mechanism, Africa was taking less than 5% of the project share. So this is a really positive development. But I think we also have to be clear that with this amount of growth, there are quite a lot of risks as well as opportunities. So not all of that growth is even. So different countries are taking up different shares of the African carbon market, and not all this growth is in the same sectors. So we work in nature-based solutions, and that is seen as a growth sector. But there is a huge amount of project development happening in energy, transport, and waste that is also a really, really important part of the market as well. And then one further point just to add is I think what we're seeing, which we think is a really important part of that growth, is it's not just growth in quick and easy projects. This is growth in high integrity carbon. And again, there are many definitions out there about what high integrity means. But for us, we see that as high integrity in terms of high quality MRV, high verification, high data standards, but also high integrity in terms of how it delivers on wider sustainability goals. So how projects support the sustainable development goals, but also communities and sustainable and economic development within the countries themselves.
Indeed, that's very critical there. And you did mention quite, amazing numbers there. Let me call them amazing numbers or interesting numbers, looking at the huge shift that you're seeing in between the years. So then I would like to understand how we go about now the challenges and the support that is needed when it comes to realizing the market's potential. And let us tie that with the MRV and also the market credibility. Let us look at how robust monitoring, reporting, and verification is important in supporting the market growth.
Absolutely. Well, look, I think speakers before me have talked about the challenge of investment. So this remains a really key part of the gap, is that there are great project ideas out there by really innovative people, but the investment into the market is still too heavily skewed, I think, towards public sector sources. And Thomas mentioned this as well. We need to look much more creatively at the sources of finance. I'll come back to investment. I think one of the key barriers I would highlight that hasn't been talked about today is regulatory certainty. So when project developers and investors are looking to engage in the African carbon markets, one of the biggest gaps traditionally has been regulatory uncertainty. But I would say over the last 5 years, probably even 2 to 3 years, we've seen a huge uptick in the countries developing really clear and robust regulatory frameworks for investors and project developers to operate within. We're a friend of regulation. Strong regulation is something we support, as long as it is consistently applied by countries and also transparent. So when, as a business developer, you are looking into a market to see if you want to work there, you're really clear what you need to do, by when, and how much it's going to cost you. And I think that's a really key positive development that has come about over recent years. It is important, though, that countries are harmonizing and talking to other countries in the region about their regulatory framework, because the development of slightly different but a bit aligned frameworks in neighboring countries is really, really will create a barrier to business. Certainly in the nature-based solution space, where projects span national boundaries, a forest doesn't recognize a national boundary. you need to make sure that the regulatory frameworks are not layering on top of each other, but that they're working in the same direction. So that's one thing I think that's really, we've seen some really positive steps in markets like Kenya, Zambia, South Africa, but there's more to be done. And it's also more to be done to make sure, frankly, Tabitha, that countries are not left behind. So the LDCs in Africa are the least developed countries, really want to engage in the space, but often don't have the capacity in government at the moment to develop those frameworks. Some of them are doing a great job with the capacity they have, but it's still a work in progress. One further thing where we really, really want to see more investment and engagement is in the scientific capacity of African states. African universities and tertiary educations have great natural science programs, but there are very few, if hardly any, schools or diplomas or recognition, as you mentioned, Tabitha, of the kind of integrated space and skills you need for the carbon market. So we need to see more investment into developing African science research base, but also the training and capability programs for African carbon developers themselves. And that is really important to make sure that the African entrepreneurs get a fair share of the financial benefits from carbon projects.
Indeed. It's an ecosystem, as I said. So you do mention some key points here, looking at the local impact, skills, and benefit sharing. And I think when it comes to equitable benefit sharing, a number of factors come into play. So how then do we ensure that green investments and also digital shifts result in fair benefit sharing, that is for local communities beyond urban or even external actors?
It's a really good question. And you mentioned before as well, Tabitha, the importance of MRV in this context. So look, data is power, right? And if you have the data, whether you're a community, a project developer, or a government, you can use that data to inform your decision making. And I think one of the biggest criticisms of the market historically has been that people were not totally in full knowledge of what the project meant and what their expectations were about carbon projects. And so when you provide data to communities, to businesses, to developers, to governments, you create a transparency around that. And that allows everybody to make informed decisions about their level of investment engagement in projects. So as an MRV provider ourselves, we are a big proponent of making data about the land available and used by the communities who are involved in the projects. And that also involves making sure that communities are part of the design of the project at the beginning, so that they can also, as custodians of the land, be providers of the data. You can send a carbon scientist out from the global north who does one measurement of the soil in 1 month of the year, but that's not really going to tell you the real dynamic nature of that ecosystem. But if you have people living on the land, farm workers, farm managers, communities who are day to day in touch with that land and understand that maybe some months are a bit wetter than others and that will impact the soil carbon in a particular way, if you can harness that knowledge, then you really are going to get sophisticated data and make sure that your project is top notch. So I think the key thing to come to really your answer to your question around how do we make this fair is transparency and the trust that transparency begins to build in the carbon ecosystem.
Indeed. And I know data sellers, let me call them data sellers, people that sell data in the room here, they're at an itch. They're like, no, we cannot just share data. We have to sell data. That's how we make money. So it's critical when it comes to, data sharing there. There is data information sharing that is important, but there are people who are keen on data protection, which at the same time is also important depending on how people are going to use data for, what purposes, profit making purposes or just information, information to help, make informed choices or informed decisions when it comes to matters investing and even, businesses. So
Yeah.
I think this is a question that each and every one of us can, agree or respond to, that we do need equitable benefit sharing. And from Madeleine, you did mention quite a number of important factors there, but I'd like for us to jump over to Thomas. Thomas, I'd like to hear your thoughts on the equitable benefit sharing. How do we ensure, again, that green investments and the digital shifts that we are seeing, they actually result in fair benefit sharing? That is for our local community, beyond the urban or external actors that we do have or are coming into play here. Like you are an external actor when it comes to the Kenyan, energy market. Yeah.
Well, thank you. Well, I was listening to Maida before, and now I really strongly realize that I'm just another guy in a suit talking about equitable benefit sharing, but I'll still try to answer to the best of my capacity. I guess when we talk about the energy transition specifically, it's mainly about the megawatts and about investment. That's what we covered. But then there's also the local communities, of course, and they tend to worry also about other things like their jobs and their livelihoods and their well, just their future really. So a good example of that is what we've been doing in the context of repurposing coal-fired power plants in South Africa, specifically in the Grootvlei region. As I think you probably know very well, that there's huge energy plants, coal-fired power plants, are being phased out as part of the energy transition. It's important work, but it's necessary from a climate perspective. But at the same time, these huge power plants, they're very often they are the backbone of the local economy. There's of the entire region. So when one of those plants closes, it's you lose electricity generation. Well, you can back that up, but it also means losses of jobs, local businesses, and then there's a real challenge there when you talk about equitable benefit sharing. So what we try and do is we look at how you can repurpose those areas in a way that creates new opportunities, economic opportunities. We don't do that by ourselves, by the way. It's often collaboration with partners as well. There's many other organizations involved there. Also GIZ, for instance, one Maida works, but also World Bank is involved in it, and other like just energy transition related actors. So what we did, we looked at for instance, developing horticulture instead, and also we had to assess the basic conditions for that, like water availability, to see what works, what is sustainable, and these things sound simple, but it's actually really important. If you don't get it right, you're just replacing one system with another that doesn't work. So we try to focus on skills development, making sure that the workers, the local communities can participate in new sectors. Otherwise, you have an old economy disappearing, and the new economy doesn't include the same people, and it's that's not just, let's say.
All right. So, Maida, I think we can agree that Thomas, let's give him the, some bit of confidence. Yeah, he's just not a guy in a suit. He has done some incredible work. He did mention Nigeria, Kenya, and even South Africa. So it's quite commendable. But Maida, your take on equitable benefit sharing?
We're not okay there. Yes, thank you. I mean, absolutely, Thomas. I think there's a fair gender balance in this panel, and I also think that we definitely need men in suits to help us out and to work, on to support and advocate for women and for diversity in general. But yeah, I would say towards your question, Tabitha. I think, benefit sharing just doesn't happen automatically, especially not, in this digital and green transition. If we don't design for it, if we don't design our programs for it, then it just won't happen. So for me, I would say there's two things that matter here, especially, is that firstly, that people are partners, everybody's involved from the beginning, not as beneficiaries, but as co-creators of a program. And because of this, we need local communities to be part of this design, because if local communities do not design this, then it's not meant for them, basically. And then secondly, I would say, what we've discussed here before is who controls the data. Absolutely, data is important. Open data sets are important. Open source is important. But who owns it? Who profits from it? And who has access to it? Those are questions that we have to ask ourselves, definitely. So Yeah, I would say, especially with budget cuts and the prioritization of humane topics in this globe at the moment, if we don't actively design for equity, then we will simply, continue living in inequalities.
Indeed, indeed. All right. So I think we can now take audience questions. Thank you very much, Maida, Madeline, and Thomas. This is Elaine. He's still talking. I think Maida, you did take a question from Mr. Elaine Steven, and he I think is still talking about the power grids from Thomas that he did mention. I think we can get more questions from the audience. Okay, I think I saw a question on the gender issue. I think we tackled that. I think that ticked everyone. Okay, we have a question from Marefu. What percentage of water projects in the first 2 years become successful? Very good question. I think this question is for Madeleine, right? Madeleine, would like to take that question?
I'm not a water expert, so I'm not sure it's best placed towards me. But I would say that's a really difficult, just in terms of projects, being implemented on the ground. I think key to success is investment that is patient and persistent and clear. And, the water sector, I think that's a challenge sometimes. But I think colleagues who work in water might be better placed to speak than I am.
All right, Thomas Maida. What
I also don't work
percentage
in
of
water.
Yes, Thomas. The ball is in
Not
your
sure,
court
Thomas.
as I try to get more questions from our amazing audience here.
Well, so the question is, what percentage of water projects is successful? Well, that's quite the statistical question. I don't have the answer at hand. What I do believe really works when it comes to creating a successful water project and setting it up is to use expertise, and in that sense, I'm from a country where water management is part and parcel of the national and the local policy, and it's been like that for many centuries. And we're actually working on setting up a lot of projects all across Africa. We're talking North Africa, West Africa, and West Africa. We're working on coastal protection, which has a lot to do with water management as well. But we're also working in the water sector, in the horticulture and the agricultural sector, which are also very big in our country. So we have a large base of entrepreneurs and knowledge and institutional, let's say, tacit knowledge that we can use and that we are actively using to also help projects. So I'm not sure exactly what the percentage is, but I think it really helps to use genuine experience, and well, that's what I can say about it.
All right, great. So I'd like to hear your final thoughts. Ladies, let us give Thomas the room first, and then we can grill him afterwards. Yes.
For my final thoughts,
yes, your key takeaway from our conversation. I do have quite a number of key takeaways that I've noted. I think for you, Thomas, I can say what I've gathered is policy, translating that into action. Maida, there's a lot when it comes to the capital, and funding. And also, Madeleine, one important thing that you mentioned is we need real people doing the job when it comes to AI. So any key takeaways, Thomas?
Well, a takeaway would be, and this is just a thought that I've had for a long time, and it's about financing still. I would say it's really important to focus on data. It's been mentioned a couple of times throughout the conversation, but we need to improve finance. There's funding available. We do need data in order to get that finance going, because finance follows clarity. So this is something that I cannot repeat often enough, and I'll take the opportunity to do it once more. Data is important.
Great. Maida?
I would say we need more private capital. There is private capital, but it should be shifted around a little bit more. Cooperation over fragmentation, I would say that's incredibly important as well, looking at our Team Europe spirit. And inclusion is not automatic. It must be designed intentionally, especially in these dire times.
Great. Madeleine?
Well, Thomas stole my data, so that's my one point. But yeah, I agree 100% with him. Data is power and vital. I also agree with Maiga about inclusion and avoiding fragmentation and investment. So I suppose my parting thought would be that the missing piece in that is skills. So, you raised this very, very much at the beginning, Tabitha, like skills. All sorts of skills are going to be needed to make sure Africa fully benefits from the green transition. That's from skills at working level, entry level, through to high-end skills, project management, accountancy, carbon accounting, energy modeling. So we would love to see a strong investment into skills so that when young Africans want to engage in the global clean energy transition, both in Africa and worldwide, they have the skills to be able to play their part.
Indeed. Great insights are there. For me, skills, implementation, and finance, that's key to top it up. So thank you all very much for all your great insights this afternoon on the fourth chapter, that is ICWS African chapter. I have been your host, Tabitha Muthoni, and now I pass the mic or the floor back to
Thank
Summit.
you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Tabitha, for the wonderful work you have done here, gathering from our speakers to our audience. I want to thank Maida, Madeleine, and Thomas also for their time and their insight and the dynamic during this panel. I loved it. I learned a lot regarding all the work is happening now in Africa. It's refreshing and it's encouraging to see all the work going on. And until we meet again for the next discussion of this series, I invite everyone to follow us on LinkedIn, on YouTube, to stay informed about what's coming. We have not only series going on Africa, on Europe, and on North America as well. And the next one will be on April 30 for Clean Mobility Future in US. And I invite everyone to join us for this hybrid event where we will share some insight from Washington, D.C. Until then, have a great day. And thank you again to all our attendees, Marshall, Alan, and all who join us and make it really interesting and valuable. Thank you. Take care and stay safe.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Ciao.